gonna say is there's much more than enough that's messed up. Good morning.
How are you today? You mean it's not raining or snowing or whatever?
Or zero.
Sleeting, right? Yeah. Am I be out there?
Good thing we're not having a forum next Sunday.
Yeah.
You wanna give a, I'm not in charge necessarily, but while you wanna talk to the
You?
yeah. You have
I think we're important things done this year. Number one, I got a paper on the economics of infectious diseases accepted without revision and published in the real world economics. Okay. Basically, if somebody on any place on earth, including the other side of the earth, has symptoms that might be due to an infectious disease, it is your best interest is mine. Cross that first, seek combat medical attention.
We should be sending vaccination.
Great, 1%, 100%. Then you said that. And I feel like that.
But then
Actually, that's one thing. And here's the ninth. If out at September 11th, we know what not only that September, which has been agreed to before the movements, right? The Taliban told them to go down. Because the U.S. proved that they are really free the fire. Some of that said they were.
be kind of early.
Yeah. Okay, he said that Nixon was similar, except that he spoke in person. Okay, so he speaks forward, protecting ourselves, for a minute, peace, and he pause for a minute, right? And it didn't come across. He didn't register. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Small size. It's only one. Now the kids like that. They wear different sizes. Different things you do for us every day. 40% education, 30% science, and this is 20% miscellaneous. Testing 1, 2. Me neither, Bill, on purpose. Testing 1, 2, 3. Is that what coming now? Um, is this one? Is Mika? Is this on? Is this one on too? Testing. This is on. Testing, 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 testing. Is it on? Testing, testing, testing. That's good. That's good. Okay. Testing. We got about 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Maybe this ought to come up just a little bit. This is kind of like I'll be precise height. I'll be about this far away. Okay. Just so that way, if you need to turn. I do. I will need. I didn't bring in notes. I'm just going to go off that. Can I what? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. What do you want me to do? Testing? Yes, please. It's good. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Dioxins are fun. Okay. You gonna start your recording? Go. Let's go. Good morning. I'm George Baggett with the All Souls Unitarian Church. Welcome to the Unitarian Forum. We've been in business of talking about various topics, sometimes controversial, for 43 years. And this morning we have Craig Volland to speak with us. Craig is the chairperson of the Air Quality Committee of the Kansas chapter of the Sierra Club. While he is retired and works as a volunteer, he's still certified as a qualified environmental professional by the Institute of Professional Environmental Practice. He will talk about the flaw in the regulation of the air pollution in the United States and the U.S. that leads to environmental injustice and to certain population areas. Craig? Thank you, George. Um, I'm speaking today because we were planning to have Clean Air Now, which was formerly called the Diesel Health Project, that has been operating in the area of air quality in the metro area for probably about a decade. But because of the Christmas holidays, they did not have a speaker available. So what I thought I'd do is lay the groundwork, more or less the scientific groundwork for what they're going to talk about when we get them here, which would probably be in the next month or two. So what we're going to talk about is most people hear about fine particulate
which is called PM 2.5. In the news sometimes when we're talking about how bad the air is or how good it is. And in fact, that is the basis for that part of our air quality regulations. There's other things like nitrogen dioxide and ozone and other what they call criteria pollutants. PM2.5 is one of those. But what people don't realize is that uh, the system that we use to regulate these fine particles is, in my opinion, flawed because it isn't capable of regulating concentrations of types of particles that are more toxic than the average. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Actually, the level of PM 2.5, which is a fairly small particle, you can see here the little red balls there. That is a depiction of uh, 2.5, 2.5 microns, which is a millionth of a meter in diameter, and compares it to the human hair, which is 50 to 70 microns. So you can see that they're already pretty small. But actually, as I will discuss, um, the smaller the particles floating around in the air, in most cases, depending on the source, the more dangerous they are because they can access further into the human body and even into the nervous system. So, the one particular type of emission that is particularly dangerous are diesel emissions. And this is a depiction of a typical diesel particle, which is composed of a carbon particle that because carbon, as some may know, is attracts other chemicals, particularly gases, because activated carbon is in fact a treatment process for removing certain gases in power plants. Well, when they spewed out of a diesel truck, they are also accompanied by certain gases, in particular polyaromatic hydrocarbons, many of which are carcinogenic. So when they get out to the cooler air, they condense onto these particles, and uh, they make this particular particle far more toxic than the average PM 2.5 particle. So the health impacts, and this is another point about diesel particles, they're actually, most of them are less than zero point 0.1 micron. So they're even um, far smaller than the PM 2.5. And that is not, since the regulation doesn't take that into account, that is, as I'll discuss further, a flaw in the system if you happen to live around a bunch of diesel sources. Here's some of the health impacts: new or aggravated asthma in children, new and aggravated cases of heart and circulatory disease in adults, early mortality, and some types of cancers. The studies for diesel emissions that showed a relationship or a connection to cancer were in occupational settings, which is like it might be a diesel truck maintenance center where the workers were exposed to diesel emissions all the time. So I want to make that point that it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're next to a diesel truck out there for 10 minutes that you're probably okay, but if you're exposed for a lengthy period of time, you will not be okay. This is one thing most people don't realize that we all know that fine particles and other gases will be breathed into your lungs, and the finer the particles, the more likely they will actually get into your bloodstream. There's an interface, as you know, between the in your lungs with the blood circulatory system, and so it's intended to put oxygen in your blood, but it'll also put in other stuff. Uh, but most people don't realize that when you smell something, the reason you can smell anything is because your brain senses it. So there's also an interface with the up in your top of your nose to the nervous center and system, and that's another area or another pathway into your body. And the smaller the particles, then the easier it is for them to get there. So we're going to talk about now where these diesel emissions uh, primarily come from, but I'll also mention what else is in highway vehicles. This would include cars and trucks. Is carbon monoxide, the fine particles that are regulated, PM 2.5, oxides of nitrogen, and then there's diesel emissions. And here again, these are called ultrafine particles because they're less than 1.1 micron, which is a millionth of a meter. And then there's also heavy metals, and around these small particles of diesel emissions are these polyaromatic hydrocarbons, many of which are carcinogenic. So just to show you, it's important in this talk to remember that Kansas City is actually one of the most important transportation intersections in the whole country, including St. Louis, Chicago, uh, and some other cities. But that's why there's so many trucks and trains, particularly trains, in the Kansas City area because we're right in the center of the country. And in Houston would be another example of where you have a lot of transportation vehicles, warehouses, and so on. This gives you the thickness of the red line, tells you what the daily traffic of trucks is in Kansas City. And you can see it's along I-70 primarily is the most of it, but the other freeways as well. And you can be exposed to diesel and other pollutants from cars and trucks um, if you live a certain distance from a roadway. And this is characteristic graph that shows that all of the pollutants are very high, uh, about 100 feet or 100 meters, 100 feet. I'm sorry, 100 feet from the roadway. But if you get to about 1,000 feet or 300 meters, uh, most of the uh, most of the pollutants have gone back to the background. Sure. Thank you. So you might wonder about that because people all the time in Kansas City, they're building apartment buildings right next to major freeways. And I wouldn't suggest living in one unless you got it completely sealed. You don't want to ever open your windows. Uh, but that's what happens. And that's one of the reasons I'm talking because it really doesn't make any sense to be putting people maybe 50 feet from this Southwest Traffic Way or that one that comes right through the middle of Kansas City. Okay, now we're going to talk mainly about the pollution from diesel emissions only, from goods movement, trucks, trains, and the distribution of products. It's important to realize that in the last 20 years, ever since Amazon uh, appeared, the number of warehouses and diesel trucks that are required to bring product in and take product out, although taking out usually smaller trucks, but most of them are still diesel at the moment, that the amount of exposure to diesel uh, emissions is probably much higher than it was just 20 years ago. Now, there are some things I'll talk about later that are being done to try to reduce this, but at the moment, uh, you don't really want to live too close to a big warehouse either. And until recently, I lived in Kansas City, Kansas, and that's where Amazon put their first big warehouse in the metro area. And now there's a whole bunch of other warehouses that have been put in place within a mile or so of there. Primarily, they put warehouses in close proximity to a major freeway, obviously, so they can get in and out quickly. So the biggest diesel emission problems are large and over-the-road trucks, warehouse and distribution facilities, train locomotives, and rail yards. In general, the point here is uh, wherever they congregate uh, trains or heavy duty diesel trucks in one place, you're going to have concentrated emissions as well. And that's what we have in many places, as I'll show you in just a second. This is from Mid America Regional Council off their website. You'll see the freight concentrations. Instead of spreading them out, they, for whatever reason, they uh, generally congregate. There's a huge newer congregation down by beyond Gardner in Edgerton that you probably see if you go down I-35. There's just I can't even count all the big warehouses down there now. And where there's a warehouse, there's going to be big trucks and trains in that instance as well. Um, so the one we're going to talk about more today is the one in central Kansas City, both KCK and Kansas City, Missouri. And that's this. Um, to the left here, that's Kansas City, Kansas, and just on the other side is Kansas City, Missouri. Down there to the southwest is the big industrial area, which has the BNSF rail yard and a lot of older warehouses there. And then on the other side, that whole area in red uh, in the curve of the Missouri River is one vast area of warehouses in that area. This is a overview of the BNSF yard, and they're not the only yard there. There's a Union Pacific yard to the east, and they're right near I-70. And south of there, you'll see a lot of neighborhoods, and this is what makes this particular congregation of diesel emission sources particularly problematic, is because there's people living so close to it. This is on the Missouri side, and just to the south of these yards and tracks, there's a large residential area there. But the difference is that that residential area is probably 100 feet or more above. It's on the bluff. It's on top of the bluff. Whereas all these warehouses and so on uh, are down below, and this helps some as far as the residential areas, but it actually makes it worse to the people, the workers, and there's not very many homes, but there is one section of homes that have actually been down there, right in there on toward the west of that picture, and so in either case, we're in a river valley here. It was the Kansas River Valley over in Kansas, and this is the Missouri River Valley. Is that river valleys are subject to temperature inversions. That's a phenomena where um, actually warm air comes over usually a change in the atmosphere where a layer of warm air comes over and over what was cooler air, and the warm air that forms on the ground where all the pollutants are has a hard time lifting up because hot air rises. Well, it won't if there's this on top. So there's this layer, kind of a blanket, which causes the pollutants in the valley to build up. What you want in dispersion of air pollutants is vertical mixing, which means it dilutes vertically and horizontally. In this case of a valley, under certain conditions, it will only dilute horizontally, which is, and these, if the wind's not blowing through there very hard, which it wouldn't be under those conditions, then it just sits there. And so that's why both of these places, if you work in one of those warehouses down there, even though you don't live in that area. The people above it are probably somewhat protected, but down there, working in that all day is not good for you either. So that's the situation in Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri. The other flaw in wait, I think I may have missed something here. No, okay. The other flaw in uh, the regulations is that there are so few federal regulatory monitors. These are the ones that are essentially the basis of enforcement. And in this case, you can see there's a PM 2.5. Remember, they're only measuring PM 2.5, not the real nasty emissions. And this one's probably 5, 6 miles away from where the emissions are. So they're not going to be able to really protect people down in there. I think I passed the other one. Nope. Oh, okay. Up on the upper right, that's where the regulatory monitor is in Kansas City, Kansas. It's on 10th and State Avenue, which is here again 5 or 6 miles from where all the pollution is happening. So here again, there's two flaws. One, they don't properly regulate the finest ultrafine particles in the uh, carcinogenic carcinogenic compounds that condense around them, and they don't measure them either on a regular basis. So those are the two flaws that create a problem. Well, who is it that's usually living next to these rail yards and freeways? Well, it's usually people of low economic status. They're living in old homes, drafty old homes. So that is the basis for a lot of what Clean Air Now is going to talk about, which is environmental injustice to these people in urban areas. This nothing new in Kansas City. The worst case was which really started the Clean Air Now, and that effort is out in L.A., where all these products are coming in on big ships from China primarily, and that was has been pretty much a nightmare for people living near where all those products are brought in and all the warehouses. I've taken the train to LA recently in the last year or two, visit my son, and for 30 miles, you'll just ride just nothing but warehouses for 30 miles before you even get to LA. Then they're all over the place. So that's one of the worst cases. It's also not too good on the East Coast. So it's not just a problem here in Kansas City. Now here's a picture. This is an actual picture some of the people that worked in the Diesel Health Project made to show the people living that close to these big locomotives. This is a particular issue. They have the BNSF has I think it's the, or it was the second largest in the country. They have a vehicle, their locomotive maintenance center, and you can see in the dark lines there. That's the locomotives lined up. Here they are in another view. And what they do there is um, they'll take them in and they'll run them at top speed. What they're trying to make sure that they operate when they're going up the Rocky over the Rocky Mountains on the way to L.A. And so all of that goes out the stack and right near where you saw people living. And the Diesel Health Project did some testing in the vicinity there and found elevated levels of what's called elemental carbon, which is a marker for diesel. Another marker is black carbon. The main only difference is that black carbon contains those other compounds that have condensed onto the particles. Elemental particles is measured by filtering out the air and then burning it off, and all that's left is carbon. And so that's called elemental carbon. But both of them are markers, well accepted markers for diesel emissions. but there's no there in a few locations they do measure that, but it's in these farther away federal uh, monitors. In this case, the EPA did come in and take some tests around um, this facility and found some elevated levels like we did, but they didn't really have a regulatory basis to do anything about it because there's no standard for these or black carbon or elemental carbon. They just said, well, it's below. But the problem is that of a PM 2.5 particle, only about 10% of it is elemental carbon, so or black carbon. So if you did a test and you had this big spike in black carbon that goes to 20% of PM 2.5 in the instrument that measures PM 2.5, you're going to get this little bitty blip. You see, and so the system is not. It wouldn't cause PM 2.5 to spike. It would just be a little jump up. So that's why there's no way to really use that kind of data to do anything about this. Now, they are actually trying to do something about diesel engines. I don't think it's enough. Starting in 2006, you may recall that all of a sudden, when you went up to the gas station where the diesel would show that the diesel gas, I don't buy it, but some people had diesel cars and trucks. They actually were reducing the sulfur content because that's one of the compounds that attaches to the elemental carbon. And also in 2007, the EPA required the um, new high heavy duty diesel truck engines to improve their removal. They actually had to set up so they filtered out some of these particles and also had the kind of a catalytic converter type thing that cars have. And that does remove PM 2.5 because that's what they're measuring. It doesn't necessarily remove all 90% of the tiniest particles that are diesel emissions, and also the oxides of nitrogen are also removed by 95%. But that's on new heavy duty diesel trucks. And in fact, certain states, in particular California, as usual, is leading the way on air quality improvements. They have had actually good success out there in reducing their particulate and fine particulate and black carbon quite a bit in the last 10 years because they said you have to do this on all your trucks, whether they're new or not. You have to put these measures on there anyway, because as you know, the air out there is not too good. So anyway, they've made a lot of improvements, but I think I saw that there's only 7 states that actually put their own regulatory standards onto trucks uh, beyond what the EPA is doing. But remember, it's only when you have a new diesel truck that they have this. And here's the problem: if you're in California and they come and say, okay, you've got to get a new truck or something. You got to put or retrofit onto your old truck these new filters and so on, the catalytic converters. And so you've got this old truck. Well, I'll just buy a new one. Okay. Well, what do you think happens to the old trucks that still run? Well, I don't have any specific data, but I have a suspicion that since they cost maybe $30,000, but a new heavy duty truck is $150,000, I have a suspicion that those old trucks are just filtering out all over the country to folks where they can get away with it. So that's where the other big question, and I haven't seen anybody address this, is where exactly does all this old equipment end up? Now, I went and got the latest report to the federal government is also has a grant program, and they also got some money from the big scandal with Volkswagen. They got some money to give out to states and localities to try to get rid of dirty old diesel engines, which is good. And so I went to see where we are with that. And they said that from 2008 to 2018, this program had replaced or retrofitted diesel engines in 74,000 trucks, locomotives, and boats. However, as of 2021, there's still 8 million legacy heavy duty diesel trucks still on the road. So it's a good program, but it's not really meeting the need. So there's still a lot of dirty trucks uh, on the road. As for locomotives, one other thing there in that program, one thing I really thought was great, and this is happening in locally, they are either retrofitting or getting rid of old school buses so that the children won't be exposed to those old uh, diesel school buses. And so that is actually going forward. And there's also been some rules on reducing the amount of idling that's going on both the Missouri and Kansas side, and that helps a lot too. So it's not like they're not doing anything, but they're not really ensuring that people living near all these sources are safe, in my opinion. Now, locomotives, they also had an upgrade there, um, which here again, it was new engines on locomotives um, and would reduce particulate matter, PM 2.5, by 90%. And they'd also put on idle controls on upgraded locomotives. So there's here again, it's similar to trucks. Uh, but the problem is, what is the fraction of the ultrafine that they're removing, the most dangerous? And also, I determined that at least in the yards on the Kansas side, that those locomotives that are actually the ones that run around free to take stuff off and put back on long trains, those some of those were built like 40 years ago. So, and there's in the case of both trucks and uh, locomotives in almost all states, there is no law that says that you got to quit using them if they're dirty. So that's another, I think, problem. So that's the situation. You'll hear more about this. I still have a little bit more to go here, but um, you'll hear from Clean Air Now when we get them here. Uh, exactly what they're trying to do about it, which has to do with things like campaigning to get more direct regulation here. And there's other things you can do in a temporary mode. For example, if you live near one of these sources, the first thing you do is go get the very best furnace filter you can. Okay. And I use them anywhere, wherever I am. There's some that can even remove viruses now and put them in your furnace or your air conditioning system. And that's one thing you can do personally. But if people are poor, because these are fairly expensive, um, we should be giving those away to people living near there. That'd be just one small thing could be done. Now, the whole purpose of this talk was to show you that there's a certain flaw in the system of regulation where it's focused on just the size of a particle and what can be measured at a big one of the main regulatory monitors 5 or 6 miles away. But that isn't it even gets worse in the agricultural realm. This is a concentrated swine feeding operation. And what happens if you can see all the dirt and stuff, they stand in their own feces. They're forced to do that. And of course, in order to, they're all breathing or trying to breathe. So they have to run these big fans on the end of the building just so they don't all asphyxiate because they're crammed together so much. So that's blowing out. and it not only blows particles of the feces, but it blows uh, their skin particles that also have bacteria all over them that will get in and mess up your breathing. That's one example here again where it's not the size of the particle that's important. It's what's on the particles that are blowing out, which is bacteria and these irritants to your system. And since they use antibiotics in order so they all won't die, um, there's antibiotic resistant bacteria on these particles. So this is another example of where the regulatory system does not adequately address the nature of these particles, not just their size. Here's another example. This is a series of broiler chicken barns, and I think it's in North Carolina, that blows right out. These are huge fans. It blows right out onto this residential area. And you got the same problem here that the particles blowing out on these very powerful fans will be fairly, well, it'll be a typical PM 2.5 size particles, not as small as diesel, but they'll be coated with bacteria and other irritants to your breathing system. And I've seen studies where the chicken industry, which doesn't know beans about air pollution, they um, go out there and they say, well, we ran tests on this air and it was below the PM 2.5 standard. Well, so what? And so here's another perfect example. Now, in this case, it's environment. This is a fairly large town. This is going on and happening. I think one of the under recognized environmental injustice issues in America is what happens to rural people who get stuck living next to these things, because that's really the same issue. They're not being fairly treated by our government or these industries. So that's what I have to say, and I hope that when we get it organized, that you'll come and listen to Clean Air Now and see what they're doing about it, because there are people doing stuff about it.
Thank you, Craig. We'll take up a collection for the forum. Next week, we're not having a forum. The following week, we're going to have soapbox. Anybody wants to volunteer to speak for 5 minutes on any topic you choose is welcome to talk to organizers of that, and I think he's one of them. So we'll take up the collection.
Particulate matter. Yeah, I should have. You should have raised your hand in the beginning, but oh, okay, yeah.
Well, thank you, Greg. An excellent presentation as usual. Um, I live in Missouri, and there's a lot in the media about the terrible conditions in Missouri around the animal breeding farms.
Right.
What do you, just how bad is our situation in Missouri relating to air quality
Um,
around these feeding operations?
well, it's pretty much bad everywhere in the middle Midwest. That's where the worst of the CAFOs, that's concentrated animal feeding operations, are for growing swine, producing swine.
Hmm.
It's not their fault. It's just a characteristic of the technology, uh, and it is true that unlike cows, swine are really like us. They're omnivores, and their waste stinks. If they put all us in one little barn, it would be the same. So anyway, yeah, there's what happens is though um, what I call big ag. The CAFO companies are all part of the whole industrialized food scheme in America, where they grow almost all the crops as monocrops in vast fields. And something like 60% of those crops, soybeans and corn, go to feed animals. And so if you live in, it used to be you'd think, oh man, I'd love to live in rural areas in a small town where the air is clean and you're doing this wonderful, wonderful thing of growing food for the people and you can raise your kids in a safe area. That's becoming less and less true because of the industrialization of agriculture. So, uh, in the case of Missouri, I happen to know a little bit. Butch here at the church is involved in that because he owns a house uh, out in rural Missouri where they're trying to put in a big hog factory, or they already have. And so, because of the disease, one of the interesting things about uh, CAFOs uh, is that when you cram all those animals together, you automatically have a disease problem. I mean, it's just obvious. This was learned actually. Concentrating together of animals is not new. Humans were concentrated in World War II in concentration camps. They almost got, and so they had rampant disease. So what they did in the 1970s, well, we can give them antibiotics, but antibiotics don't affect what? Viruses. Viruses are not susceptible to antibiotics. So they have these big die-offs. I'm getting a little bit off subject here, but this is uh, important because the antibiotics then cause the bacteria among these animals to then become resistant to antibiotics, and that blows out of these buildings and can affect people and essentially undermine the value of antibiotics for humans, which is going on. So, but anyway, the reason I brought that up is because, in particularly where they're really concentrated in Illinois and Minnesota and Ohio and that area, the upper Midwest, they had such a problem with disease, particularly in their breeding facilities, that they started uh, putting them further away, and that's why there's more of them now coming into central Missouri. There's always been some up in the northwest, the huge ones up there, and they're doing that in Kansas now too. They're actually shipping piglet. They're starting to breed more piglets in Kansas and ship them 500 miles back to what they call finishing facilities, where they grow them up to slaughter weight.
Yeah, would you discuss a little more about the polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons that are possibly coming from kind of uncontrolled industrial boilers, and people burning their trash facilities around the industrial areas as a source of those complex compounds that are attaching to the carbon?
Oh, well, yeah, there's a lot of sources of these. Actually, George would be the bigger expert. He could answer his own question, but it's just been shown through, for 20, 30 years. It's been known that these PAHs, they're called, are carcinogenic if you get enough of them. There is a dose response function in most of these things. If you just get a little bit, you're probably okay. But if you're consistently exposed to these particular organic compounds, um, the other thing is that um, the benzene ring is kind of the basis for all these, and that's a huge subject. But benzene is also pure benzene is a big carcinogen as well, leukemia, I believe. So anything that puts these out, which the worst case is would be burning garbage because of what all the different stuff garbage has in there. So you don't want to be near any burning of garbage, and particularly medical waste. You don't. They've pretty much quit because of this and the campaigning against them. The hospitals have pretty much quit burning medical waste, but there's still one in Kansas City, Kansas, I'm aware of. You don't ever want to get near those because of the particular nasty stuff that's in medical waste. So that can form mercury because they use mercury in a lot of those batteries and stuff they use. So anyway, yeah.
Talk about regulatory capture and the conflicts of interest that the major media have as it impacts the issues that you raised.
Well, regulatory capture is a problem in the whole environmental realm. The agencies, particularly the state agencies, are heavily monitored by the politicians. This is true in Kansas. It's true in Missouri because they want their priority is economic growth and getting money to for the state and for themselves, I suppose. And so regulatory capture is when an agency is supposed to regulate something, but they basically underregulate it or don't or ignore it because of political uh, considerations. And that is, as far as diesel emissions is concerned, I think that's probably another example um, because Kansas City is such a big center of transportation and uh, distribution of goods. It would be costly to get rid of these dirty sources of emissions. That's why the Clean Air Now is lobbying, trying to. They've actually were in the news just about a month ago about KCK and a woman there who runs a daycare center, and how on some days she has to just close everything up because they have these small monitors called purple air monitors that are popular now. They measure PM 2.5, but they can still be useful if they're high enough. They'll show, oh, it's a bad day. And so she was talking about how this group who installed those Clean Air Now. Uh, so there are people trying to do something. There was an article in I don't remember where, but about Chicago. There's a group in Chicago that does the same thing. There's a group in LA, of course, one of the beginning of this citizens movement about bad air, this localized diesel bad air started in Los Angeles. And in fact, the person that who is the co-chair of Clean Air Now moved here from Los Angeles, so he's got a lot of experience on that. Did I miss something on your question?
No, I think I was just fine. I have another question.
Oh, okay.
Something completely different. All right. The carbon emissions and carbon monoxide emissions are actually products of incomplete combustion, which suggests to me that if the diesel engine designers produced an engine that would com burn those things more completely in the combustion chamber, it would actually be cost effective, and it would would reduce the cost of fuel for the truckers. Your comment?
Well, that's true. I'm no expert on engines, but my impression is that diesel fuel is less refined than gasoline in cars, and the diesel engine appears to operate at somewhat lower temperature, and so you get less efficient combustion. Well, then you'd say, well, why do they use it? That's the question I don't know. There must be some advantage to it for big 100,000 pound vehicles that in trains. One little fact that I meant to mention about locomotives that I learned in the process of studying this in the last 10 years is diesel engines don't actually directly drive locomotives. What they do is generate electricity, and it's electric motors that actually drive locomotives. I'm not sure how that affects all the emissions, but you can actually. One thing I didn't want to mention is there are some hope in the future for big trucks. I just read recently they've got an electric truck for regional delivery, not long distance delivery, but for taking goods around. They're starting to build electric trucks, which would, of course, get rid of emissions. There's also hydrogen. Hydrogen is a substitute for diesel, and they're trying to develop it. But you got to be careful there because you want the hydrogen to be produced by renewable energy and not just from natural gas. which is the way it's currently made. So they're working on that. That would help solve the problem as well.
The price of diesel seems to be incredibly higher than the price of gasoline. And so, do you think there's any potential for gasoline engines to start replacing some diesel engines?
Well, it is true. I think diesel's been like $5 a gallon versus $3 a gallon for regular car fuel. Um, I don't see that as driving big trucks to use gasoline engines. I see that as an incentive to switch to hydrogen or electricity. So I think the high cost of diesel is a good thing because if there's anything that motivates these people, it's money. And to save money, because if you think about it, I work out of my home, of course, and I look out the window and I see delivery trucks all day long. I'm not even on a main road. We have switched from people going to the store to people getting and ordering stuff online. I don't personally, mainly because whenever I do, never really happy with it. So I like to look at it, feel it. So at any rate, so I think the high price of diesel will make a big difference. I think the reason for the high price though is that the refining industry has not kept up with quantity. That's what I understand. Yeah.
To sort of add to it, when I was little, I recall that diesel was cheaper than gasoline, and I just Googled it. As of 2004, diesel fuel was cheaper. So that could be a reason why there's a lot of diesel engines out
Out.
running around.
Oh,
It was cheaper back then.
oh, good idea. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, right. Well, that's probably true. I assumed that when I was, 20 years ago, that's what I assumed as well. But that's not the case. So that's a very good point that you brought up. Or was it George? I think you. Yeah, right. Is that the high price of diesel could be a really good thing to help solve this problem.
Well, there's another thing about diesel fuels that should be noted is that there are different types of diesel fuels. Is that there are diesel fuels that are qualified for farm use that are not legal to be used in commercial vehicles. So it's the diesel. In fact, I think there's an issue that the diesel may be on its way out a bit too because of the costs, like you say, and the efficiency of some of these new electric trucks and EV trucks. They're actually working. So some of the big industry, when I work for, they're buying hundreds of these trucks that are electric or plug-in models for local deliveries.
The problem with electric vehicles is that retards their use in some uses is the weight of the batteries. Because the longer you want to go without stopping for hours to get your batteries up, then the more weight you got to carry, and that's the main problem. And that's why I don't see electrics, heavy duty long distance trucks. I think that's got to be hydrogen because you can just carry it along like you did your diesel.
Um, there is an intermediate thing, if you will, um, and that is hybrid vehicles. That is to say, like the diesel locomotives that generate electricity that drive the wheels, which is the same design as hybrid automobiles like the Prius. Um, and it would seem to me that there would be a market niche for diesel locomotives or diesel tractors.
Mhm.
Tractor trucks, semis that are also hybrid. You know that because you're running the engine at more of a constant speed, where it can be actually more efficient at the constant speed, and that's why the diesel locomotives are designed the way they are. Your comment?
Well, I think you pretty much said it all. I have not heard of any movement toward hybrid long distance semis. But I have heard a lot about hydrogen. I just feel like that's probably where it's going to go. But that I'll look out for that.
Hi.
Yeah.
I'm a visitor and I'm apologizing for being late because I was sitting in the sermon room because I thought that's where. Oh, sorry. I'm a visitor and I apologize for being late because I was sitting in the sermon room. I came to hear your
That's
lecture.
okay.
I'm yeah, yeah, they didn't tell me. Um, I'm from Canada originally, and I've lived around the world, and I'm just here visiting my son who has moved here, and I'm curious. So just sort of a departure from the fuel because we did drive across to get here, and we're kind of startled at the diesel trucks and et cetera about those emissions. But to deviate from that back to
Right.
the animal issue. Yeah, I'm a vegetarian. My husband is. Our kids are. The environmental aspect of dense animal
Those
husbandry.
right.
Um, it was kind of surprising to me that when we were coming to Kansas City to celebrate the holidays with our kids, having never been here, Googling what are the top 10 things to do in Kansas City, I think 9 out of 10 were going to barbecue restaurants.
Right.
So, so I'm curious to know, what media information is being shared about the horrific effects of, close condensed animal farm practices and moving people towards more alternative plant-based diets. Thank you.
Well, it's a huge issue. There's groups. The Sierra Club is involved deeply. Um, there's hundreds of. It is recognized now more than ever as one of the single worst environmental problems in the country because not it also tends to contaminate the food. If you've got antibiotic resistant bacteria and they go in these horrendous slaughterhouses, and if you know anything about, you don't probably don't want to know, but when you look into what they do in there, it is not designed to prevent um, the contamination of your food with some pretty nasty stuff. Um, and I remember one time, it's been a long time ago, but I was at a table with an industry person and I brought this up and he said, well, that's a point of use problem. In other words, they're dumping this horrible technology, the consequences of that onto you to make sure you heat it enough to kill the bacteria. And that's kind of their attitude. But in answer to your question, it's what I work on more than anything else. And all over the country, there's groups. Usually starts somebody in exurbs or rural areas that have to deal with one of these things, and then they get all the people together and fight it, and then it goes around the state. I'm optimistic that over time, but I agree with you that in order to really defeat these things, because big ag is so politically powerful, that people need to, at a minimum, eat less of animal products or become a vegetarian if you want. I'm not going to tell people what to eat, but if you want to solve the CAFO problem, don't eat all this meat. Yeah.
Great. If you've already spoken about this issue, um, I'm also late for being informed. Um, can you hear me now? Um, thank you for introducing me to Mid America Regional Council's Air Quality Forum. At that, at the time, I served after you had served, and we had a wonderful trip to the EPA where you could actually see how they distinguished the soot and the particulates from vehicle emissions from those of, say, burning of the prairie. So I've always been curious how we solve that problem. It seems like all of the prairie people want to burn on the same day when it's sunny and there's no wind.
Exactly.
But all those huge, the Kwanzaa Prairie, these areas that need to be burned for proper management, we get their soot.
True.
We get their particulates. And so I know that the Prairie Foundations recommend patch burning, which is
Mhm.
not economical for um, group. And it just is there any big solution to
Well,
those
there's
sources that I'm sure lower our air quality? Yeah.
right. Um, there's two solutions to it, and I've worked on this issue since the early 2000s to try to bring it to the public eye. The one, and this is, they're talking about the Flint Hills burning, which occurs in late March in the first 2 to 3 weeks of uh, this whole idea of burning all that grass in a brief period of time started 50, 60 years ago and is really no longer valid. There is no there's no even production reason for doing it all at once. What they found is that you can actually burn in the fall and kill this leprodesia. There's a particular weed out there that they all hate because the cows can't eat it. Leprodesia, I think says. And if you burn in the fall instead of the spring, it kills it, greatly reduces it. So that some people are starting to do that. Some people are doing patch burn instead of burning everything every year. They burn a third this year and a third next year. So there's some progress there. This last year was not a particularly bad year for the burn. Um, they also advise, and here again is another form of environmental injustice. Their advice to these farmers is they tell them the best day to burn when the wind is not blowing toward eastern Kansas, because that's where all the people are. That's where all the relatively well-to-do people are, and you don't want to piss them off, make them angry. And um, so where does it burn? Every year they have big waves going to uh, Manhattan, Kansas, where all our students are. Something like 30,000 students there that get gassed every year. And it's a long story I could talk about, but they actually shut down one of the monitors they had there so they could do that, and it wouldn't be caught on the. So here again, people who live in Kansas, rural areas, or even small towns, are subjected to some of the same environmental injustices that low-income people are in urban areas, and neither one of them are right.
Thank you, Craig, for speaking. I guess we got about 1 minute left here.
Yeah, if you want to meet in the library here,
Yeah,
we can have further discussion.
we will adjourn to the library to talk about this a little further in quiet and peaceful, and let the sale go on next door. You're welcome to attend the meters sale as well. Anyway, thank you very much.
All right.
It was good.